the pioneers that Maggie wrote about. I've got her theme in my book from college.
Yeah.
Have you forgotten that?
No, she just brought it to mind.
Oh.
And I think your mother had a lot to do with helping you.
Yeah. Well, and the truth of it is about Joe Preece, nobody's absolutely sure where fact and fiction but he was a very interesting character, and he came to this country under unusual circumstances. And the reason he got into those circumstances was his father was a gamekeeper on an estate. And they had a cottage, and they had milk cow, and they had a nice garden and a few fruit trees like that. It was really a comfortable life for him. But Joe Preece, at the time of, by their time they were 14, at that time, the education was through. They were all through.
Is this in England?
Yes. They were ready to go to work. And it was around Hereford. There's a small town out of there that I haven't got everything tracked down. But anyway, Joe Preece's dad sent Joe to town to sell one of the family pigs and come home with the money. Well, Joe Preece got into some sort of mischief or something, or a couple of shysters got a hold of him, and they got his money away from him. And he was afraid to go home. So he went down and joined the Marines on an English sailing ship. And they sailed around Cape. Now, I'm going to try to track down and see if I can get the information, how long he was in and so forth. But anyway, in the Straits of Juan de Fuca, they had to anchor because of a heavy fog. And he and two other Marines lowered a boat and rowed towards the foghorn. Fortunately, the foghorn was in the United States, not Canada. Otherwise, we all wouldn't be here. So anyway, he boomed around the country. Now, Mother told me that he went as far down the coast as San Francisco. And she had he told her quite a story about a guy cutting up a Chinese pigtail, which was a very bad deal at that time, and they had to run for their lives anyway. But anyway, he worked at Sprague and in the woods and Spokane, and he supposedly was quite an expert bridge builder. But anyway, he came back through Ellensburg several times and finally decided to stop here. And he was in a bar, and this fellow wanted to sell his patent on a place, which was catty corner from the Denmark Hall, and he bought the guy's patent and moved out there and built a cabin and farmed out there, and he lived there the rest of his life. But he was a very good friend of Walter Bull's, the old Walter Bull, and Grandma Preece, a McDonald, her brothers went into Oregon, and she went to Seattle to be a maid for a doctor. Well, the doctor happened to be a Dr. Bull, and his brother lived in Ellensburg, was farming. And through he needed household help, and so Grandma Preece went over and was a maid for Walter Bull. And Walter Bull had a picnic, and Joe Preece was a friend of his. And Joe Preece came to the picnic, and that's how all this got started.
Now, my story was that was when he was running freight up here from Oregon, and Grandma Preece was the little 15-year-old maid there, and Grandma Bull was running this boarding house.
Well, that's probably,
And he always stayed there. And they told a story about him that some of the people that stayed were always that clean. And he'd always announce that he didn't need anything, that he didn't want any of those dead bugs in his thing.
well, that's good. I'm glad to get any information like that, because I knew that Grandpa Preece ran freight from the Dalles up over the
And
M10.
he always had a black and white horse. Had quarter horse blood.
Yeah, he wouldn't have a straight old work horse.
Always knew he
You'd go
was
have to be
because of the black
Tennessee
and white
Walker or have a little of that blood.
Faster.
But anyway, I'm glad to have that information. You know, when you go at something like this, now Joe Preece came into the country illegally. He was an illegal immigrant. Also, the Royal Navy had press gangs at that time, and if they caught you, you were gone. That's all. And if they couldn't find you, they didn't care if they picked up, you know. I mean, just so they replaced you. You know. So it was a pretty tough business at that time.
And he was in this outfit, you know, the blue and the
Yeah, the
red
Marines.
and outfit.
He was a Royal Marine.
He tells about, or the family told about knocking on the door for food. And the woman that was so shocked, she's saying so scared, he said it was, she wouldn't have minded if a painted up Indian had arrived. But this guy, all dressed in this royal.
Yeah.
Do you know where that was at?
Yeah, there was up on, well, no, not exactly. You see, there wasn't anything out the Olympic Peninsula. There wasn't anything, except maybe loggers would go in and log, and the trappers were trapping in there. And where they ended up was at this cabin, and he had a lady, probably his wife, maybe, you know. But anyway, she was really shocked to see these guys dressed in their dress uniforms. See, they didn't go out in their old grubbies. They wore their dress uniforms out when they when they deserted.
Do you have a sense of what year approximately that would have been?
Well, let's see. The way I figured,
I think it was in your story.
no, 1850 is too early because.
660.
Oh, 1860.
Yeah.
Now, it could be, I think it was before that, but it could be as late as 1860. You see, he was born in, depending on where you look it up, but between 48 and 52. So he's born in it, and he got through school at 14. So
Would you dare to write the,
he may have not been through school, but he left home at that time.
I wondered if at this day and age, if a person would write to the British Marine and ask.
No, that's not Merchant Marine, the Royal Navy, you'll have to go through. But,
Come back and arrest us.
Pick one of you guys.
Don't get somebody to replace
Take this guy. He's big, strong.
I'll write him, I don't.
No, you
that's one thing I figured on doing was writing to the consulate and seeing how, somebody told me one time, because I was interested in Joe Preece, and they told me a place to write to get information about the British Navy. But I don't know where that little piece of paper I wrote it down.
Filed away someplace.
The other thing I was thinking about was that too, in those times in England, thievery, even little minor thievery, those people were, they're the people who ended up in Australia, you know,
Oh, sure.
or in a
All
bowl
those people,
somewhere.
They put
It
them
was
in a
really,
debtor's prison.
yeah, it was really
And they were
serious.
gone. No chance.
Yeah.
How long, Uncle Donald, until his family heard from him? Because he didn't dare even get a hold of him, right?
The story that I get, it was 16 years before he wrote home.
Yeah.
And I think about the time he met Mary McDonald and was thinking about getting married, but I think he decided to straighten up his act. But anyway, Joe Preece was, people liked Joe Preece. He was a character, but his word was his bond. And I'll have to tell you about Odegaard, who had the hay company out of Kittitas for a number of years, and the grain, hay and grain, and he dealt. And he was a young guy, and he had some kids, and they all went to Kittitas schools. And so he'd heard about Joe Preece and what a practical joker he was. And so he thought, well, I'll put a little practical joke on Joe Preece. The way I got this story is when I was in Madigan General Hospital, and was Wednesday afternoon, the doctor would make his rounds, and after he made his rounds, we could come home, I come to Ellensburg. So on the way through Seattle, there was a Elks Club on South 4th Street, around close by the highway there, where all the Ellensburg people went. And all the people that had originated in Ellensburg and went to Seattle to make their living, they all went down there in the afternoon. And I stopped in there, and this fellow heard my name. He's an older man. He said, "Did I hear the name Sorenson?" I said, "Yeah." And he started visiting with me, and it was Odegaard, Mr. Odegaard, that had the business in Hibbing. And he says, "Joe Preece, your grandpa?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Let me tell you how I met him." He said, "I had kids, and I wasn't doing too good, and I had an order, and hay had just went up $2. So I decided to go out to Joe Preece and fill out that order, see if I could get him to sell me the hay. So I was going to pull a little practical joke on him. So I went out to Joe Preece, and I went through my spiel about my kids and so forth and so on, and I needed 50 ton of hay to fill this order out. And Joe Preece says, "What's the price?" I said, $14 a ton. And Joe Preece says, I say, young buck, you can have that 50 tons of hay." And he said, "Oh, Joe, I was just kidding you. The price is really $16 a ton." He says, I say, young buck, you bought it for 14, you take it."
He was from Norway.
Well, he said, "I quit trying to pull practical jokes on Joe Preece." And he says, almost every time I did business with him, he pulled some kind of a practical joke on me.
The I say was something that he always said.
Every sentence began with I say.
Yeah, yeah, every sentence, that's the
Before
way.
he said good morning to you, or
Mother said, well, he really didn't use it that much. Well, he may not have around home when everything was just normal, but Dad said he always used it.
Skinny Sorenson still talks that way.
Is that right?
Well, sort of, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Heck, he's your neighbor, you ought to know, don't you see him?
Oh, Skinny? Oh, well, he always prefaces everything. Well, Skinny did this and Skinny did that.
Did other people use that I say, or was that just his little ism?
It was quite common in England.
Huh. So, like if you were making a pledge, or, did it
Yeah,
Did it mean
if you
listen
wanted to
up, or-
emphasize something.
I really mean
say.
it, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
well, like we always use okay, and we have our other idioms.
But let's see, Wes Wheeler, his dad, they lived right across from us south of Kittitas. And he was an old man. He was a the first white baby and born in Kittitas County.
So now his name was Abe?
Abe Wheeler.
Okay.
Yeah. And Abe Wheeler had a neck or a yoke, oxen yoke, you know, with the iron bars and the whole bit, in the willow trees up above his gate where you went into the front yard. I always remember that from the time I was a little kid. But anyway, his son Wes was kind of a character and a narrative. And I have to tell you how they branded their horses. They took United States dimes and they made a little slit in the hide of the horse up on a certain spot on the shoulder. Slid the dime in and closed it up. If anybody stole the horse, he'd say, "That's my horse." "Well, can you prove it?" "Yes, I can prove it." So when they got down to getting the sheriff, he'd say on the left shoulder, right under the hide there, you feel some scar tissue. There's such a year dime there. And he always used the same year on it. These pioneers were quite, they had a lot of good ideas. But anyway, Joe Preece had a little, his cabin there, and Ott McEwen, Margaret Ann got writing lessons from Ott.
No, that was mine. No, maybe I did, I don't remember.
Oh, yes, you did. But anyway, Ott McEwen, they lived down where Kenny lives, right in that area. That's spring there and everything. They lived, the McEwen family lived right there. And they raised horses, mostly horses for the Army, and they had a few pigs and stuff like that if they could find them. But there wasn't any fences and the brushy creeks and all. So anyway, Ott had some younger brothers and sisters, and of course they didn't have a milk cow. You know, nobody'd have a milk cow. Couldn't milk it on a horse, you didn't have a milk cow. So Joe Preece, the old bachelor, lived in a low cabin. He had a milk cow in the garden and so forth. And so Ott McEwen would come over every morning with a milk pail carrying her like this, and he'd get milk for his little brothers and sisters. So the year that Ellensburg burnt down in '89, there was stuff flying through the air, and Ott come over for his milk, and Grandpa Preece says, "What in the world? What's going on? What's all this stuff done?" "Oh," he said, "don't you know? Ellensburg burnt down." You know, that's how he got the word Ellensburg.
1889?
1889, yeah.
My mother was born in 1897, and Ott McEwen drove to he was working for Grandpa Preece then, and he drove to Ellensburg for the doctor. And he always used to tell that story, that we, and Ott would tell that he got the doctor for the delivery.
Yeah.
And he did teach. Selena used to go riding with us before he went to Moses Lake.
Well, you did too. You took riding lessons.
So,
Don't deny it.
I gave her her best riding lessons on Skeeter, the little gray independent that was way smarter than us kids. And Margaret Ann was on Skeeter, and if you got on Skeeter and there was a tree nearby, she'd run under a limb to make sure she was and Skeeter I was holding the line, I think, and keeping her under control, and she pulled away and took off, and Margaret Ann was yelling, "Nano, save me, Nano."
there's another side of that story too, because Art Peterson was the hired man for your dad, and he used to tease me. and I didn't want Art saving me.
Well, you know, that's another story. Art Peterson and Elmer, and they were going to Washington State College, and they were working for Dad in the summertime. And, of course, they decided they'd set a batch of home brew, and so somebody told them, now, when you set that and cap that home brew and it's all set to go, drop a couple raisins in there, and it'll give it more punch, more alcohol. So they decided, well, if one raisin would do it, why not 4 or 5? So they 4 or 5 in one night. They had it on the shelves down in the basement, and all hell broke loose. It flew out. And Dad put an end to home brew in the basement. But anyway, getting back to Mr. Odegaard, every time I'd stop in there, why, he'd come over. He wanted to talk about Ellensburg, and he was really a nice old man. I think his stories were probably pretty authentic. And he told me about one time, and he was managing a thrashing machine and lining up their jobs when to go to a certain place. So he went down to Joe Preece's place, and Joe had been nipping a couple, you know. And Odegaard came in, he said, well, Joe, I guess you want the straw stack in the same place. He says, I say, young buck, I don't want it there anymore. Well, where do you want it, Joe? Right up here. Joe said, in that corner, that's against the wind. We can't thrash against the wind. And he says, the bundle wagons would have to drive in and then back the horses out. He said, we can't do it there. He says, I say, young buck, that's where I want it. But I'm going to the house now and won't be back till tomorrow morning.
What did Grandpa Preece have to do with building the town ditch? Seems like I always heard something to do with
Grandpa Preece, now the way I get the story, he was the head man on it, but I haven't been able to find any details on it, how accurate it is. But he worked on it, that's for sure. And
I understand, I think your story says that he took a contract to put that tunnel through Craig's Hill.
That's right.
The town ditch went.
Well, that's
and that's what I think.
That's every story I've heard, but I haven't been able to confirm it, but I think that is true. But anyway, Mother told me that they had a little shack that they slept in with a cook stove in it. And of course they had to use dynamite and drill and blast and dig it out and drill and blast. And he said he got up early, and one of his guys went with him, and they went down to check the tunnel, see what the progress was and everything. And they put the dynamite, when they went to bed, and the fire was all out, but the oven was still hot and everything. It was cold weather. So they put the dynamite in the oven. Just a nice warm place so it wouldn't freeze up on them. So they've been in the tunnel 15, 20 minutes or half an hour, and they come out, and here the smoke was boiling out of the chimney. One of the other guys got up and built a fire.
Oh, gosh. And then?
And then they may not have known it, but the best way to get rid of bad dynamite is to burn it up. As long as they haven't got the caps in it or anything like that. And so Joe Preece, I don't know whether he knew it or it was just a lucky shot, but anyway, he ran in the house and he had the case of dynamite, and he ran down the hill a few yards and then threw it as far as he could. But it worked out all right.
Wasn't there another dynamite story on him where he had the cat problem?
No, I don't remember that.
tied the dynamite to the cat.
Didn't the cat run into the house?
Oh, no, I never heard that
That's how the
story.
house burned in.
Dynamite didn't go off for some reason, the cat.
Boy, was it to have the cap in it and everything? Fuse, no? Or
Yeah,
just a stick?
he tied it to the cat, then set the thing off, and then the cat ran into the house. For
The
some
fuse
reason, it
went
didn't
out.
go off.
A defective fuse.
And how sober was you that day?
Well, the only thing I would say, you want to make sure it wasn't your house.
Well, it was, either Grandpa Soren or Grandpa Preece's
Yeah.
house. Well, I don't know which one it was, what it was.
But anyway,
You don't remember that, huh?
No, I've never heard that one. Or I've forgotten it if I have heard it.
You know which one it was, Mom?
Well, it would be the Preece place.
But anyway, Uncle Pete came over as a young man, and you can imagine a young Danish boy, probably, what, maybe 18 years old, and had lived in a country like Denmark, and all of a sudden he's in this wild and woolly West country, and Grandpa Preece and Sorenson were good friends, and all around the hills was all open range. There wasn't any fences. Anybody could turn their cattle in there, and so everybody turned their stock that wasn't in use at the time. They'd turn them out in that range, and so Grandpa Preece was going down to check on some stock he had down there, and Grandpa Soren said, "Why don't you take Pete down and show him the ropes?" Well, Grandpa Preece got him down there, and they camped out, for all night, and they rode around, and then they camped out, and the coyotes were yipping, at night, and Joe Preece kept telling Uncle Pete, he said, "Better put another stick on that fire. They'll be allowed to fire. You better put another stick on there." I guess Uncle Pete didn't get any sleep that night.
Preece made warm.
He was feeding that fire with sagebrush. Then Grandpa Preece liked Uncle Pete. And Uncle Pete, when he got over here, he got some some money to spend and some things, and he bought himself a beautiful pair of gloves, and they were, it was kind of winter time, and they were fur-lined and the whole bit, and they were really nice gloves, So he went to town. Joe Preece saw him in town, and he saw him leaving, and he had that beautiful pair of gloves on the back end of his surrey, see. He went bouncing down the street, and the gloves bounced out. Well, Joe Preece went and picked them up, and he kept them for about a week or 10 days until he was in town the same time Uncle Pete was. And so, and he was parked at the same place at the hardware store. And so,
Or the tavern.
well, it could have been too. And so anyway, he was parked where he always parked and everything. So Joe Preece went up and put those gloves right before they'd bounced off. And Uncle Pete came out and he saw those gloves. He grabbed them and he looked at them, and they were just like when he left them, and he looked around and see.
Now, what year was that when they went through the hill and?
Went up in the sagebrush?
No, I mean, when they made tunnel through the town ditch, through the hill.
Well, that's something I have to find out. I've got to get in the office there and see what records
Do
they
you
got.
know if there's any history of the town ditch
Yeah,
that you're aware of?
He asked me, and I don't know. There probably is, though.
Yeah, they finished in '04.
Pardon?
Put water in '04. Like,
In '04,
when the waters went in.
that's when the water first went in. So it'd be around 1900 period when they were digging the tunnel and digging the ditches and all.
Seems
And-
like, oh, excuse me.
You got it.
Well, I might be changing the subject, so you go ahead and finish
Well, I
what you're
didn't
going
have
to
a
say.
subject.
Oh, okay. Well, I was just thinking, it seemed like we heard stories about Joe Preece coming home from town late at night, and that he had really well-trained horses, and how that all...
Well, you know, all the old timers had a story about Joe Preece, and one of them was that when he went into the saloon, he had a drink or two, and he got the horses headed for home. He hung them up on the buggy standard and slept all the way home.
Good deal.
And his horses, what's his name that lived? That half-timers is coming in again.
All the way to Z.
The guy that lived out, Kittitas, Joe Hinkle. Okay. Joe Hinkle said, anytime I wanted a buggy horse, I went to Joe Preece. And anytime he wanted a workhorse, he went to Luther Harrell. Luther raised beautiful horses.
But Mother and Aunt Flora could always pick their own horses that they rode. And no one else could ride the horses. They'd break them themselves. And the hired men would maybe want to borrow a horse to go and get on the horse, and they always bucked them off. And these horses would only let Mother and Aunt Flora ride them.
And after Dad married Grandma Flora, Joe Preece had a workhorse, and it was a medium size and just a going concern. That's the greatest horse that ever lived. And Joe Preece just loved it.
Stranger?
No, that was I can't think of her name right now, but anyway, she would pull anything. She would just work her heart out. If she's working with a horse that wasn't doing its part, well, she'd do it all. It's that kind of a horse. And Dad kept trying to buy the mare. And Joe Preece says, no, I won't sell that. I'll never sell that horse. Oh. And the Dad kept working on it. He says, oh. And they were selling for around $250 or something like that at that time. And Dad kept after it. Oh, you aren't so bad, John. John, I say, you're going to have it for $500. Dad said, I'll take it.
I want to get back to these late nights.
So that was the basis of our workhorses, was that mare. And she was a dandy.
When Grandpa Preece came home, 3 sheets to the wind, did he wake up the kids, or did he wait till the next morning that they'd get all the little lessons? Because he didn't. Yeah, you go ahead.
He always paid all his, when he'd get a little bit tight. See, it was even during our time that the farmers never paid their bills until the end of the year and the crop was in. And I remember when I was working for Dad, that his marriage with them, he still paid his bills that way. He'd come over and tell me that he just paid, and he'd tell exactly what he paid.
Each person.
But anyway, when Grandpa Preece had a few drinks, he'd go around and pay off all his bills. He'd go to the bank and gather out this money, and then he'd go and pay off all his bills. And then the next morning, when he sobered up, either Mother or Aunt Flora would have to come, and they'd say that they'd try to get out in the orchard because they're at that place right on the corner, kitty corner for Denmark Hall. It was all in orchards then. And they'd try to get out there, but he'd snag one of them, and they'd have to come in, and he'd put all the money down that he had left, and they'd have to count it. And then he'd proceed from there, and he'd tell where he'd been. and.
Oh, and do the
it had to
bookkeeping.
And
come
how
out
much
right.
he spent, that was his bookkeeping.
Yeah, that's the way it had to come out right.
But also, weren't there some Bible verses and some preaching going on because he didn't want his children to follow his same path? I remember Grandma talking about.
Well, I don't remember that story, but I do remember the story that they told about him. It was one of these times, and he paid all his bills. And then at the end of the year came this bill from a grocery store here in town. It's where, well, you probably don't even remember where Gilmore's was on Pearl Street. But anyway, that was the big grocery store. It was there. And the man that was the bookkeeper and stuff had sent him a bill for the amount. And when he went to town the next time, he came in shaking the bill as he entered the store, shaking it over his head, looking for that chippy chaser. She cheated him out of the money. He said that never happened again.
Well, Dad got into trouble. This is the height of the Depression was, about the time the High Line was coming in, and Dad had bought 80 acres there where Jerry Graff later bought, where Addie lives, you know, that 80 in there. And he paid a high price for it, times were booming, and then everything went bad, you know, and things were tough. Things were really tough. And so, as Margaret Ann was saying, you paid your bills, you charged all year, and you paid your bills in the fall when the crops came back. Well, Dad had a big bank loan out, and he got paid his crops, and he went around the hardware store and Devine's Grocery and Kittitas and all the stores and paid them off. Well, the bank didn't like it. He was spending their money. And Dad said, well, that's tough. He said, well, if you don't raise that money, we're going to foreclose. And Dad says, well, he says, if you think you can farm it better than I can, be my guest. And they started foreclosing and served the papers and everything, and then they decided they'd rather have Dad running it. About that time, the High Line came in, and the Pease drove the wolf away from the door.
It was the fresh gravy, you see.
Now, I've got a story about Harry Hayes. Everybody knows Harry Hayes. And we're going to country school out in Denmark, and Harry Hayes come down the road with a wagon, and a team of horses, and a harrow thrown up on the wagon, and one of those old one-way plows, you know, that you with the seat on it that you ride back and forth. And he drove into the yard down there where his home place ended up. The first thing he did, he got a big board and he nailed it onto the gate, and he got some red barn paint, and he wrote, "Beware, wolf at door."
Well, Harry Hayes used to say that they lived in an old, clapboard house on that same road, the Denmark Road down.
That below.
Now, who was that?
Harry Hayes.
Oh, yeah.
And he used to say that the cracks in the house were so big they could throw a cat through anyway.
Anyway, I got a story here about Walter Bull, who was a friend of Joe Preece's. And anyway, they had a mutual neighbor by the name of Pat Lynch, and he was an ornery son of a gun. He didn't get along with anybody, but he was a good, staunch Catholic. And the priest rode through, I don't know how often, maybe once a month or something, and took confession. So Pat went up to confession, and he had been feuding with Walter Bull. giving him a hard time and cussing him out and everything, and the preacher told him, now Pat, you gotta go down and you gotta apologize to Walter Bow. You aren't being right with him and you gotta do that. Walter Bow told Joe Preece, he says, Pat came in and I was milking the cow. And he came in and he dropped down on his knees and he says, oh, Sir Walter Bow, please forgive me, please forgive me. And Walter Bow says, oh, come on, Pat, get up on your feet. You don't have to do that. Oh, no, you got to forgive me. Do you forgive me, Sir Walter Bow? Walt said, of course I forgive you. Get up on your feet. And so Pat Lynch jumped up. He said, you forgive me? He says, yes. He says, you're still a rotten, stinking son of a bitch.
Now, how much land did Grandpa Preece have there at the, did he
Well,
must
that was
have had, did he?
160, that basic
Where the
home
house was?
Where the house was,
Okay.
that's 160.
Yeah,
Then up the field where every member of this family probably lived one time or
that's
another.
what I was wondering.
There was another 160 in
Oh,
there.
okay, where the little house was,
Yeah.
second, yeah, where,
And he had that.
uh-huh.
And when the, I think that's all the land he had that I know of.
Grandma Flora told me that he would have liked to buy more, but his Scottish wife
Oh,
didn't allow it. Does that sound right, Margaret Ann
Well, I
and
think
I mean,
that-
that she was more conservative. She was Scotch.
oh, she was
She was-
more, yes,
yeah.
she was more conservative. Yeah, I think that's very true.
Oh, she was a very genteel woman, very quiet, and very opposite.
No,
Life must have been it.
I haven't
Yeah.
told you about Wes Wheeler, or did I tell you about Wes Wheeler?
And be sure to tell us about how they met, too, about how, I mean, I guess you did tell us how they met, but about their wedding and stuff. You have a story about that we want you to sure tell.
No,
Grandpa and Grandma Preece.
Grandpa and Grandma Preece's wedding and all that. You told us a great story about that.
You might have to hum a few bars.
Yeah, it's about,
what was the gist of it?
well, you told us about, today you've told us about how she came and was working for the Bulls and that they met. But there was something, right, and then, but about their wedding and about gifts that were sent from, or about the nice things that they had that came to her wedding china and all that stuff. You were telling us about that, and it was just very interesting.
Well, I don't think that was me. I think that was somebody else. I don't know that.
Okay, how about a story that I think had to do with a neighbor named Hayes that was taking Grandpa Preece's water?
Oh, no, that was Pat Lynch.
Okay, that was who it was.
That was Pat Lynch, and Grandpa Preece, well, he irrigated at night after dark. Pat did a lot of things. And he'd go up and the farmer would have his water set out, and you see the canal was new then, and the banks were soft and everything. And they'd steal your water, see. And Pat Lynch would steal Grandpa Preece's water, but he had a little ditch that ran down by his cabin, and he had a little wheel in there, and it would run a little flag, and if that flag quit moving, somebody had taken his water.
Oh,
So it was always Pat Lynch that got the water. So Joe Preece decided, well, he wants to irrigate so damn bad. We see what we can do, and he got the little slip scraper and went up there in that soft bank, and he turned the whole canal down.
now, was this Pat Lynch, was he,
Related to Ralph?
yeah, related to Ralph?
Was he
No,
what?
he wasn't related to Ralph?
No, and no connection. No connection.
Doc,
Ralph,
Lynch, the guy we...
yeah.
Yeah, well, it
Ralph-
wasn't any relation,
No,
you see. It wasn't any relation.
It seemed, I have a vague recollection of Grandma Flora telling me a story about Pat Lynch. And I guess he had an Indian woman that would come and do his laundry and housekeeping. And one day he appeared out in public and his face was all scratched up. And he
I've
wasn't,
forgotten that
he
one.
wasn't talking about what happened, but they surmised that he had probably tried to get more help out of the Indian lady and she resisted.
Or maybe more than that kind of help. We have some stories about Aunt Sarah and Joe
Oh,
Perry,
yeah,
because
yeah.
Aunt Sarah, Joe was her idol.
Now, how did Sarah fit in?
And sister.
Well, when Grandpa Preece finally wrote home after 16 years, well, Aunt Sarah, had she been married before?
Her name was Taylor.
Yeah, she'd been married before and she had they had a gift shop or something like that, and her husband died.
She came and lived with him.
And then about that time, they had contact with Joe Preece, and so she came to see her baby brother.
Now, was
And
it,
Well, and to live with them.
Yeah,
so, and were they married by then, Grandpa
And
Preece
Yeah.
Mother
Grandma's?
and Aunt Flora were probably, maybe not in their teens yet, but
Ah.
were maybe 10 to, somewhere between 10 and 6.
then the neighbor, Martin Rasmussen, was a bachelor Dane who lived across the road, where Jen Dreyfus lived in that place there. And so she and Aunt Sarah started sparking and they got married, and she made a good catch there. He's a very frugal, hard-working Dane, and he had a little money. And that's what, and she set up in housekeeping there. And that's where she started making her wine, with no alcohol in it.
All right. That story.
It's all right for the children. There's no alcohol in this wine. I didn't put it in there, so it's not. I don't know why all the young bucks in the neighborhood were stealing it.
Well, didn't she have a little store?
Al Sorenson and,
Not here, but she.
But didn't she have a kind of a little store out behind her house here? I thought Grandma said that.
I don't think she
But
ever did, but she did in England.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not sure, but I think I've got Aunt Sarah's wedding ring. I have a little ring, a little gold ring that has some little diamonds and rubies in it.
Huh.
I remember her wearing it, and I think it was her wedding ring. She married her. But the interesting thing was, she was crazy about
Joe.
Joe,
Ah.
but he was always playing tricks on her.
And sassing her. And he'd tell Aunt Sarah, everybody's running scared of Aunt Sarah, except Joe.
This is but her brother Joe too, though. She was
Oh, Joe.
Yeah.
Oh,
because
yeah,
she-
you remind me of a couple stories.
So, what,
This
in
one-
birth order, what,
Well, Joe.
Joe was the oldest, and she was,
No,
I don't know.
I think Aunt Sarah he was the baby brother
Oh.
in Aunt Sarah's eyes.
She used to sort of pretend that they were not poor in England, that they were
Oh.
of better stock.
Ah.
And so she'd be telling a story, and she'd tell about the wonderful foods they had, and then he'd listen to them, and he'd interject something like this, that, yes, oh yes, we had lots of butter. He says, you took your knife, the butter was in the middle of the table, and you reached over and pointed the knife at it, and then brought it back to your plate. And then another story he told was that she'd be telling about all the things they had, and he'd wait, and he'd tell the story that he says, yeah, my brother and I, we went to school. We had 3 shirts between us, and my mother had to wash why one of us had to stay home. He loved to embarrass her. And then there was a story about them, it was Grandpa Sorenson and Grandpa Preece that stole her new surrey.
Oh, yes, oh, yeah. But it just thrashed, and it had nice, big, soft straw stack, big highway. And she and Uncle Martin had just bought a surrey with the fringe on
Oh,
top,
boy.
hard rubber tires.
Oh, boy. A real
And the only
fancy.
one in the neighborhood. And she was so proud of that. Well, one night it disappeared. She called the sheriff. And that went on and for a day. I don't know how long it went on. And Joe Preece and Grandpa Sorenson dug a hole in the straw stack and pushed it. And covered it up.
Right on your own plate.
Oh, I bet they had fun doing that.
Well, then, speaking of Grandpa Sorenson, Swan Sorenson, Andrew's father, Grandpa Sorenson had the first car in the neighborhood. It was an old touring car, and they called it Old Whitey. And it sat in an old shop down there for ages until it was robbed and there wasn't much left of it. But anyway, Grandpa Sorenson Swan Sorenson was kind of an ornery, nobody got along with him kind of guy. And anyway, Grandpa Sorenson came down the road and old Swan was right in the middle of the road and he wouldn't move over. So Grandpa Sorenson tried to go by him and honking his horn, and the team ran off and ran into the ditch. So Swan Sorenson sued Grandpa Sorenson and had him in court. And so the judge tells Grandpa Sorenson, well, I'll tell you, Soren, you were a little careless there. I'll have to find you guilty. Now I hereby fine you $1. and then Andrew Sorenson's mother, Andrew in later years when I'd go out and help him and stuff, he told me, my mother always told me, you gotta be nice to those Sorensons. Your dad wasn't very nice to him.
I've heard such stories about little Sorenson kids walking to the Denmark school and shoving Swan's machinery that's along the creek, down into the creek. You wouldn't happen to know any of those little boys, would you?
I thought it was a high wind. That's a dumb place to park it anyway.
Of course, Mom had cut some wires in a fence because I don't know, he was feeding his cattle or something. He thought that they should be able to go into that. I don't know what that story was. Do you?
Well, I'm not sure of the details, but you know, if he'd have just cut the fence and used it and then fixed the fence again, but he didn't. He just cut the wires and left them lay.
How old were you when Grandpa Preece died, Donald?
I was a little more. I was older than Margaret Ann.
We knew that. So how old would that be, Margaret Ann?
No, I don't remember him at all. I can't remember him at all. But I was born in 19 and he died in 21 or something.
Jack said that he was in the room when Grandpa Preece died, and he figured he was around 2, I thought.
That's probably right. But
And how did he die?
Just a heart attack. He was just sitting, smoking his pipe, sitting in the chair, smoking his pipe.
And had a heart attack then?
Let's see, 21.
What?
How old was he?
I think he was only, well, no, he was older, wasn't he?
Well, let's see.
He was 50, but would he have been close to 70
Oh,
then?
he was in his 70s.
Yeah,
Because
He was in his
he
70s.
was.
because if he was born about 1850.
If you say he was,
And we just saw yesterday, at 1921 was when he died. It's written down there somewhere on her papers.
My next question was, what do you all remember about the layout of the place besides the orchard and the garden and the wagon barn and the horse barn and the...
The 4-H Community Club always had a cider making project, and we sold cider to all the grocery stores. And that was one of our places to get cider and make cider was Old Preece Orchard. They had really a pretty nice orchard.
How many, how many trees and...
That was all trees.
It was
Really?
that whole corner.
Right across from Sherry.
Yeah.
And when our older kin, was Carl Anderson, and this was when Mildred and Helen and Elaine Martin were living on the place. And we gather, and I think probably Don and I were more a hindrance at this time.
We were very important.
But they'd make cider. It was just sort of a continued thing, because and Grandpa, well, he had all kinds of different kinds of apples there in this orchard. But
It was
this
really
was the same way with his gardening. He grew popcorn and cotton. And he just
So he
an
loved to
early day
experiment and
orchard.
stuff.
It was a good orchard.
Yeah.
But an orchard story was that, as I say, my Aunt Sarah was very feisty, and Grandma Preece took a lot of guff off her, and one day Grandpa decided that she'd had enough, and so he wrote Aunt Sarah a letter, and so, I don't know what it looks like now, but right across from the Denmark Hall was a whole row of mailboxes. And Aunt Sarah's was there, and the priest was next to it. And Grandpa went down and put the letter in the mailbox. And Grandma Preece was aware of it, so as soon as he'd come back and supposedly gone out to the field, why, she sent the two girls, Aunt Flora and Mother, out to get the letter. And they said they got out to the mailbox, and then out of the orchard came Grandpa with the stick, and he says, I say, put that back in there and get home with it. So Aunt Sarah got the letter.
Well, Wes Wheeler, I don't know if did I finish that story about Wes Wheeler? He was, he left home when he was about 14 years old or something like that, and he hung around all the balers and the thrashing machines, and he was water boy at first, and Grandpa's Preece had the best well in the area, and he had good water. And so anyway, the baler crew, they sent a couple of men over with a 10-gallon can and a couple of horses, and they were carrying it between them, and every time they start to get off their horses, Joe Preece had sicked the dogs on them. Finally they gave up and they went back to Baylor, and they said, that OSOB, he won't give us any water, he's chasing us off there. And Wes Wheeler said he was just a young punk of a kid, but he knew Joe Preece and was really a friend of his. So he said, oh, let me take that water can, I'll get you some water. And so he got on his horse and went over there, and Joe Preece said, well, come on, Wes, sit down, have a drink, we'll fill up that water pretty quickly. And he gave him some root beer or whatever he had, homemade root beer. And so then he gave him the water and rode him back, and Wes said, I got back to the Baylor, and I was just a kid, and I was a real hero.
Did Grandpa Joe, did I hear that he was used to run a baling crew, like up in the Sadis area?
I don't know. He may have,
He
but
did
I don't
run
know.
it, and
He did drive Teamsters down to the Dalles and haul lumber and everything back to Ellensburg. He
But
did do that.
He had a baling crew because, and his men were mostly Indians. And,
Oh, he did have a baling.
yes, he had a baling
Oh.
crew, and that was after he was married. Because they told a story about the Indians, when it was time, she would come to the house. Well, he was just married because Grandma was a new bride, and they knew that she was afraid of her. And so they just let him know that they were there, and then they'd go out and sit at a distance and wait for Grandpa to come. But I remember that both Mother and Aunt Flora saying I liked to work with the Indians on his crew.
Did he only haul freight as far as Ellensburg? I thought, I remember Grandmother saying he hauled on up in Bolton.
He may have. I imagine that would depend on the occasion. Yeah, I think he probably made trips up into that. Well, I want to tell a story about Uncle Jack Kelleher and Joe Kelleher. Well, the Kelleher kids, anyway. Uncle Jack Kelleher was kind of a health nut. And when cod liver oil came into being, oh,
How dare he?
and Uncle Jack bought cod liver oil in bottles like I swear they were that big. And he would come home from work about mid-morning, and us kids would be out in the yard playing. Okay, you guys, get in here and line up. Oh, geez. And it didn't matter whether you were a neighbor kid, a Kelleher kid, a Sorenson kid, or a Stevens kid, or what, you lined up. And Uncle Jack got the big tablespoon out and got you over the sink, and you poured her and you took her down like a man, you know. And he made sure you swallowed it and didn't spit it out. But that was kind of a routine with Uncle Jack. And we'd be out in the backyard playing, and Aunt Caroline was the Negro mammy that kept house for Dr. Taylor, who lived on up the street. And she just thought Joe Kelleher was the sweetest thing that ever lived. And Uncle Jack used to tell us, eat your crust. Eat your crust. You don't eat your crust, you turn black. So Aunt Caroline's going up the street, and Joe run, hi Aunt Caroline, how are you? And she hugged him and said, Joe, how are you? And he said, Aunt Caroline, I know why you're black. Oh, is that right, Joe, honey? Why is that? You didn't eat your crust.
Oh, I remember that story, but I haven't,
Do you remember that,
Yes.
Maggie?
He had a ruptured appendix about this time, and that was when long before penicillin.
He was pretty
He was
sick.
in bed for
Yeah.
about 6 weeks.
He almost died. He was really sick.
And when she'd come by, well, she'd always come in, you see, and to see him, and it was her baby. She was, yeah, we used to always go and wow, she was a cutie, and she had a big black wig with the round braids. And when she'd go to wash, why, first she got out her pipe, packed her tin pipe, and then she took off her wig, and she had all these great curls, and she was really quite beautiful with the great curls. It gave her an entirely different look than the black braids, but Well, everybody in town loved Aunt Carol.
Oh, she was a dear, and she liked all the kids.
Yeah, she
If you were a
loved
kid,
them.
you were a friend of hers.
And some of these kids grew up to be 50 years old, and they were still her kids.
Yeah, still Aunt Caroline. Well, anyway, after Joe had his appendix out and he was recovering and he was supposed to get outside and get fresh air but not do too much, and he come out to the farm to visit around, and we were out, Mother and Jack and I, and probably Jackie Keller. I don't know if you were in on the shocking grain.
No, I didn't
Yeah,
shock him.
Jackie Keller, and we're out chalking grain, and we put Joe under a group of bundles, you know, a shop in the shade, and then we'd be shocking grain away, and then all of a sudden Joe would jump up and he'd take off on the dead run. Where you going, Joe? I gotta go up here and hear Bob cuss when he starts that team up. And there were no stopping it. And Bob cussed pretty good. Had those horses on the old binder, you know, and you back up and you take a rear at it. But Joe would take off on the run. He was supposed to just take it easy, but not, he didn't want to miss that opening.
You remember the words well.
Then Joe would come out and he just loved to get dirty. His dad was working in the grease on a piece of machinery or something, Joe was right in there, and he'd end up, Dad always bought us kids all these build hats. And if white was the color they had, that's what we got, white hats. And of course, Joe's was black by the time of the end of the first day. And Mother'd say, "All right, Joe, you got to get in the bathtub." "Oh, I had floor. I don't need a bath. I'm gonna look, my hands are not." And finally, she'd get him in the tub, and if the water turned brown, it was all right. But if that water was still clear, he was madder than hell.
Uncle John, that was your dad's thing. He'd always say, "Well, even Joe would be proud of this bachelor." Coming out on the windy day of irrigating.
Was Joe Kelleher named for Joe Preece?
Yes.
Yeah,
And
Joe
he
Preece
was
Keller.
a priest.
Oh.
And as a little boy, he had a disposition quite a bit like and this is why apparently that Aunt Sarah.
Joe was feisty,
Yes,
wasn't he?
But all the relatives would come because we were the city cousins, and when somebody was in the hospital, it was just natural for them to come and stay at our place, and so oftentimes it would be 2 weeks or so. And Uncle Martin was in the hospital this particular time, and Jack and I were probably about 7 years old or so, maybe not quite. But we didn't speak at the dinner table. Children weren't supposed to speak at the dinner table. But Joe would pound on the table and say, "Shut up, Sarah, it's my turn." and that was spirit.
And
she loved that. Oh.
And Aunt Sarah would say, "Isn't he cute?"
But it was because she probably resembled her brother.
Scoot the chair behind you. Oops.
And Joe could get away with murder with Aunt Sarah, and us kids, we ran the straight and narrow on our Jackie.
Sure did.
What was the relationship with Uncle Pete? Explain a little bit of the...
Well, he was Grandpa Soren's brother, younger brother. Grandpa Soren's younger brother.
And he was a bachelor.
He was a,
Really are till after we were about 12 or 13 years old when he married.
yeah,
And
right.
Anna.
I think I was in maybe
Okay.
Because
high
Alva,
school, maybe I was a
I think
freshman in high school.
you couldn't be in much more than that. I'd say about the 7th or 8th grade, but you might have been.
Well, I'm not sure about that. It was, but it was just about that age.
And he loved his horses too. And I don't think I ever saw any of his horses that when they had their bridles on that he didn't have either flowers or ribbons. Remember that?
Oh, yeah, Fanny and Queen. And I'll tell you, we rode horseback, Jack and I'd ride horseback to school, and when we'd race a lot, have several races. But when we went by Uncle Pete's, we walked. And we walked a long ways before we got there and a long ways after until we were sure we were out.
Rage.
Then we'd race again. And one time we started racing in front of Carl Jacobson's in Uncle Pete saw us. And when we got home, the horses were pretty well out of their depth. And Uncle Pete come driving in right behind us. What a chewing out. It wasn't all English. We got the message. Then after Uncle Pete wasn't able to take care of his farming and everything, while we all mowed his hay and raked it and stacked it and everything. So we were supposed to be in the field at 7 o'clock, and we'd go over to Uncle Pete's with our teams of horses, and Uncle Pete would say, he was married, he just got married, you know, and Aunt Anna was fixing hot cakes and homemade bread and that kind of stuff, see, and so we'd go in and have another breakfast. And so about that time, Dad had come by to see how we were doing, and did he raise hell? No more of this! And he bawled Uncle Pete out. Those kids are to be in the field. They're not to stop here and have another breakfast. So after that, Uncle Pete, we'd come by and we'd go through the yard and go out to the field, and we're working away, and pretty soon here comes Uncle Pete, and he's got hot cakes with toothpicks. Strawberry jam or whatever, and he always got the best of Dad in the end. And we all accused Uncle Pete when he was a bachelor before he got married. We always swore that he could smell the chicken frying from over at his house, because every time Mother fried chicken, Uncle Pete showed up.
You know, it was only yesterday that I discovered that Grandma Preece's name was Mary Rose. I had always heard her referred to as Grandma Preece, and I never, you know, I remember hearing about Grandma Sina and so on and so forth, but I had never heard Mary Rose. Yeah.
I don't know if I got that name down in my book or not.
Yeah.
Rose is her middle name?
Yeah.
I think that's in there.
And I just thought that was so funny, because you heard other family names, but it was always Grandma Preece. Yeah.
Donald, do you want to take a break and have a cup of coffee or anything, or are you okay?
Well, I'm okay as long as Maggie helps me out once in a while.
Is it all right to skip a little bit later?
Well, I'll tell you, I will have a cup of coffee right here and I can sip on it.
You told the story about this a little bit later when you and Dad and Bob were at home, and Grandma and Grandpa went somewhere and you guys had a party.
Well, that isn't exactly what. But Jerry Graff and I and Jim McDonald, and we had our girlfriends and been out to Denmark Hall or Fairview, one or the other. And we came home, and Mother and Dad were down in Portland to a big meeting. And Jack was going to Washington State College, but he was home for the weekend. So I said, Mother and Dad are out of town, let's go move the table back and turn on some music and we'll have a little dance, you know. And the first thing on the order was to get Jack out of bed. See, he hadn't stayed home that night. So we got Jack out of bed, and we had a rollicking good time and a dance, and I think we had a bottle of wine. how it
What a surprise.
I don't know how it got there. It must have been out of Mother's
What did you
cabin.
say, McDonald and who else?
Jim McDonald, Jerry Grass.
Oh, yeah, you definitely had one.
Yeah.
Donald Sorenson?
Poor guy.
So anyway, we had it was a good, clean-cut party, really, from normal standards. And anyway, why, Mother got home, and we put everything back in order and cleaned things up, and Mother and Dad got home. And Mother says to Jack, "Now, did you kids behave yourselves?" He said, "Mother, you missed the best party of the year." He says, "You should have been here, you wouldn't have believed it." And he said, "Man, it was just great. We had pushed back the furniture and we danced and we had a big old time, and I'll tell you, it was really wild." "Oh, Jack, shut up." Jack was at it again. So then about 2 weeks later, Ella Watson called up to town, their local gossip. "Flora, did you know what your kids did when you were gone for the weekend?" "No, what'd they do?" "Oh, they had a hell of a party over there at your house. They had a hell of a party." And Mother said to Jack, or said to us, she said, "What's this I hear about you having a party?" And Jack said, "Mother, I told you." And she walked away shaking her head. I used to get awful mad at Jack sometimes with his big mouth, and then other times it was pretty convenient.
I know that.
You know that feeling?
There was, when he was a little guy, and they had all the hired men around the table that they were feeding, and your mother was holding her breath all the time because she didn't know what was going to come. And this one time, how did that rain story come?
Karen told the story.
Yeah.
Chris?
Well, was it Chris Sorenson? Or, yeah, Chris Sorenson. It was really, Jack was quiet and Grandma Flora knew he was going to say something. And the men got quiet, just there was a lull there, and he said, "Chris Sorenson says when it rains, God's a-pissin'." And so all the guys, tried to be quiet, and then somebody chortled, and somebody else guffawed, and then the whole place just went up. And
Marion said, or Mother said that Art Peterson, he was kind of light complected, and she said everything was just quiet after that smart statement, And he said Art Peterson, the red just started going up. And it got about up to eyeballs, and he couldn't hold it anymore. He just busted. All the men at the table just roared. Well, Clarence Sorenson was educating me.
oh,
I
it
was
was
in the
Clarence.
I was 5 years old, and he was in the first grade, and he was telling me all these fine things about nature and so forth.
Did you say
What
Clarence?
was his name?
Clarence Sorenson.
Yeah, okay, Clarence.
That family, they were there for several years, and then they moved to California, and they did very well on potatoes down in the San Fernando Valley.
With no relation.
No relation, no. Then in Wheeler's Orchard, there was the old fort. You remember the old fort there, the old
I
log?
heard enough about it.
Yeah. And we'd go up there and play, and the furniture was still in there. There's a lot of old, looked like fairly decent furniture, and there's stairs going up the outside, and there's a big orchard there and a spring.
There was a spinning wheel up there in that.
Well, there probably was at that time. But anyway, we'd go over and play in the orchard, and the apples are about that big around, just nice to throw. And the people would come by, and we'd pepper them. in their cars. And our favorite target was Jewel Bynum. And she come by in that old touring car with the top down, you know, and the bridge there that you had to cross was really rough and you really hit a bounce. And we'd start throwing apples at her. Our aim wasn't too good. I doubt we ever hit her. But anyway, she was swearing all the time until she hit that bridge. Damn you kids! But she never told on us.
Now, is that Jill Bohannon, or?
Yeah,
Jill Bohannon.
yeah. She was my first grade teacher.
Yeah.
And they were living in the neighborhood then. They were living on the place that the Rays, I think where the Rays live now, on Joseph Road. And I know she told me that when Jack was born, that she came up there and helped. And then I think that she came up there later, and I know she told me, of course she was talking to me, remember, but she said that Jack was just the darlingest little boy.
That Papa's Knob?
Pardon?
Where, what location?
They were at.
That was at the Kittitas location.
Kittitas.
He was always considered, he wasn't too mischievous as well. But he and Bob gave Don a...
They gave me a working over. I'd get mad and bawl and yell and everything. Finally, I'd run away from home. But Aunt Beth lived down the road about a mile, so I'd run away to Aunt Beth.
Lots of tea and sympathy.
And I was getting pretty big. I was almost as big as she was, and she'd get me on her rocking chair and rock me and talk to me.
And I'd always tattle.
Yeah.
And say that they're doing this or that.
They were picking on him.
And so Jack called me. I was always a brat as far as Jack was concerned until I was about 40 years old. I decided that I had improved.
Well, I remember when you got married and Jack, or maybe it's just after or something, Jack said to you and Harley, "The taming of the shrew." I don't think you did much taming.
Jack thought maybe that he could, and my dad always felt sorry for him.
You couldn't keep up with Dick Sorenson, could you?
No, Dick Sorenson, that was
No,
it.
you could always tell a story on Dick.
Dick was a case you would not believe. He was quite mechanical. He really was quite mechanical, and he could take machinery apart that hired men couldn't get apart like he could get it apart. And one time, one of these regular old wagons, farm wagons, he jacked it up, put apple boxes under each wheel, took the wheels off, rolled them out of the way. Then he got an axe and chopped the boxes down.
I don't know what kind of machinery, but they brought a mechanic out from town, Toby Clerk. And he'd been working on this all morning, and Aunt Flora was keeping Dick, or some reason or the other, and the fellows all came in for lunch, and Toby was telling them, well, they probably could have a piece of machine in about a couple of hours, but he had it just, he was a couple of hours away from getting it fixed, or they were trying to get something off. They couldn't disengage it anyway, and no one realized that Dick had disappeared from the dinner table until he reappeared and said, "Now what do you want to do with it?" And he was just a little tyke.
Yeah, he was never a big guy, you know, but very wiry, quite strong.
Was there a,
And
What about your wagon? That nice red wagon that you guys had with all their
Oh.
wheels?
well, I had a wagon, or I don't know, maybe it was Jack's or where it started in the family, but anyway, it's a nice wagon and had roller bearings in it. And what Dick would do, he took everything apart. He'd come up and we'd be playing away, and all of a sudden he'd have all the wheels off the wagon, and he'd take the roller bearings and throw them. And he did that to Grandma Sorensen's lawnmower all the time. And he was quite amazing that the talent he had to do things like that.
Aunt Beth said that Uncle Al had to go away somewhere for probably to a business meeting of some kind. And knowing his son, he bolted and closed all the doors around the barn where they stored the oil tanks. And he thought that everything was under control. And when he got home, why the oil tanks had been opened, and there was a window way, way up in the top of the peak of the
There was a
barn.
vent window in the peak, it was just big enough for Dick to squeeze in there. He went down and turned on all the taps.
Oh, no.
I had to get up to climb across the roof.
And yeah, he got a ladder and got up there on the roof and went over the peak of the roof and emptied it. And you know what Aunt Beth would say when Dick did something like that?
Oh, you little sweet you.
Now, Dick, you shouldn't have done that. You know, that wasn't very nice. Well, Aunt Beth and Uncle Al belonged to the Rigadoon.
Yeah.
And they having a dinner party, you know how they have everybody out for dinner, they have little dinner parties around everybody goes. So they had a party going out there, and pretty soon they were in the middle of the dinner party, and this voice comes, "Where's my cod liver oil? Do you want me to be a little run all my life?" And he was sitting up in the landing with his legs poked through the spokes of the railing, and right up above the dinner table. But he'd used the water routine, and he was out of routines, and he finally came up with that.
was there a story that about them knocking the gauges out of a car, the speedometer or?
Oh, well, Uncle Al got a new Buick car, and it had all the fancy gauges of that time that was unusual. Probably 5 or 6 gauges of oil pressure and all the whole bit, temperature and all. And the first thing Dick did was he tested it out with a ball-peen hammer. He broke all the glass out of it. And they had he could be quite destructive.
These days he'd be unreal.
He didn't have a meat bone in his body. That was the sad part of it.
Yeah. And Bob went down, he was bucking hay for Uncle Al or something, and there was a few salmon in the town ditch that ran right through their yard there. And a few fish got through, and so Bob walked out on the bridge, and he was thinking about maybe trying to catch one, and he was looking for a fish, and he bent over the edge like that, and of course Dick wouldn't pass up a great opportunity like that. He just gave him a little push, and Bob took it. And the hired men, Uncle Al had an old Model T pickup, and the hired men on Saturday night, they'd get all their, it didn't have a roof on it, it was open in a little box on the back. They'd get all duded up and they'd jump in the old Model T and away they'd go. Well, Dick prepared it for them. He drained the water out of the radiator and filled it with oil.
Oh my gosh.
Well, the hired men were down the road a ways, and of course the thing got hotter than a pistol, and all of a sudden it blew that cap sky high. And those hired men got plastered from head to toe.
They know who did it.
Oh, sure.
Any wonder Dick survived.
But what is amazing is how a kid with that, with that temperament and everything, to turn out to be such a caring, he would do anything for anybody.
What place, you said they lived about a mile down the road. Where did they live, Uncle Al and Aunt Beth?
Well, it's the old mud place. It's a,
Where Iva and, you mean on,
I think it was where I was.
no, on Harold Clemens Road, just before you hit the Badger Pocket Road.
so that later on Iva lived there?
It's on the, Iva lived there.
Okay.
Yeah. Iva lived there afterwards in Carlson.
Yeah.
And it's a nice old place. They had a big water wheel there that they irrigated their lawn with. It's really a nice setup. But the amazing thing about Grandpa Sorenson was he came over here not speaking English, had relatives in Minnesota, stopped there and got his feet on the ground, went to work for the railroad, worked his way up to the west, and how he came to decide on Kittitas County, I don't know, or Kittitas Valley.
What years?
That was in, he got married after he got here, and I think he got married in 92, I think. No, 90, well,
John was born in,
yeah, Dad was born in 92, so it was about, probably about 90, no, it probably 89 or something like that.
Aunt Bertha was the oldest, wasn't she?
Yeah, Aunt Bertha was older. I want to tell you another thing about the character. These pioneers were something else. About 1908, your Grandpa Sorenson had been over here, say, 20 years, and he took his family back to Denmark to visit. They're going across the country in the train, and if you were under 6, you rode free. Uncle Al was maybe 6 and a half and a pretty big kid. And they were going across the country, and the conductor came in and he looked Uncle Al over and he says, he's more than 6. You're going to have to pay for him. Grandpa Sorenson said, no way. He's just a big, healthy farm boy. I'm not paying for him. He said, well, you either pay for it or I'm going to put him off at the next station. Grandpa Sorenson said, go ahead, put him off. Go ahead, put him off. He said, I got plenty of kids anyway. So the conductor, he decided he didn't want to challenge.
You know, Grandpa Preece and Grandpa Sorenson must have been a lot different in lots of ways, and there was quite an age difference, and yet they were friends.
Oh yeah, they were very good friends, and well, they had an attitude. You know, Grandpa Sorenson, I don't know how in the world he did what he did. Came over here with nothing, and but one thing about these Danes is they all helped one another. One would come into the neighborhood and they'd all help and get them started. And Grandpa Sorenson bought 160 acres out under the High Line for each one of his kids. 6 of them.
That's what
He
I
had,
was wondering about this morning, that's where.
he had, of course, they didn't pay much for it. I think
160
that-
acres. Okay.
I think it was probably $2 an acre or something like that, but it's still quite a bit of money in those days. But Uncle Harold, Uncle Al, Dad, Aunt Bertha, Aunt Agnes, and Aunt Taya, and Uncle Harold, they all got 160 under the High Line. And Uncle Pete, I think he probably bought his own, but he got one too.
Was that land cleared, was it like sagebrush or?
That was all
All
sagebrush.
sagebrush when they
Yeah.
cleared that one?
Oh, that's another story.
But
But anyway, Grandpa Sorenson belonged to the Ellensburg Poker Club. And, let's see, I gotta find, I can't think of his last name. No, it's Scotty Gray, yeah. He was the sheriff, Scotty Gray. He belonged to the Ellensburg Poker Club too. Well, you know, all those people had liquor in the house if they wanted. None of them were big drinkers or anything. But they all had it when they wanted it. And Prohibition came in. So up on Grandpa Sorenson's place, there's a spring. Jerry knows what it's at. In fact, those houses were all furnished with spring water. And so they
still call it Sorenson Spring.
yeah. So anyway, well, there's a still up there. And although it wasn't Grandpa Sorenson's, the Ellensburg Poker Club was a sponsor of the bootlegging operation.
And Rose were the operators?
Well, Rue was a separate operation. He was more involved. He transported. But,
You made it real good story.
Yeah, I know this
but
story.
anyway, Scotty Gray was the sheriff, and he belonged to the same poker club. Well, when they had a meeting once a month, and everybody put their order in, and Grandpa Sorenson came to the poker club with their order. And Scotty Gray would call Grandpa Sorenson if the feds were in town to give the tip off. So nobody would, and one time they, I don't know where the still was at this time, but anyway, I think Uncle Harold was home. And they had to move the still or product, I don't know what, in a hurry. And Dad had the only truck in the neighborhood, and they come up and borrowed Dad's truck, and Dad was a straight arrow. He was dead against it. And so they borrowed Dad's truck, and they moved the still and got everything under control. And then, a month or so later, Dad found out what it was used for.
Oh, he didn't know they were gone.
No, he didn't know. It was furniture. It was furniture. And the stuff hit the fan. And they didn't borrow his truck anymore.
Well, it seemed like one of the stories when the feds were coming, they would gather their supply up if it was in gallon jugs or something, and go down the road and throw off a jug at each telephone pole into the snow, you know, if it was winter time.
Yeah, that was a true story. That was the distribution point in Ellensburg was at the Highline Taxi, and Jimmy Hayes he was just a young kid. And Jimmy in his young life, he never drank. He never drank at all until he got to be, his wife divorced him when he was about 56 years old. And he was running the taxi, and he would be notified, and he said this one time, Ellen's talking about, why they just brought in a big supply to him, and he didn't have any place, you know, it was just there in the storeroom. And so, fortunately, it had a big snow that night or the day before. So they just hauled it out, and every time they come to a telephone pole, they threw it out in the snowbank. But he said the bad news was, the next day they got a Chinook. So they were out hustling it up. But I'll tell you, the more I think about these pioneers and new country. It's just amazing to me, and the threads that come together and produce families, and it's just really amazing.
If Grandpa Preece wasn't a Dane, of course, that must mean he was a Selkirker, right?
Well, more or less. He was more or less a Selkirker. But the Selkirkers didn't cotton to him too much. He got along with the Danes a lot better than he did the Selkirkers.
So explain all that. Was Selkirker, was that South Creek or was that Pig Creek?
Well, it was like Pig Creek, South Creek, and that was the original name they put on a creek that ran from, I think it was, I was trying to think who else. By the way, I'm officially a South Creeker. Martin Endermule said, Don, you've got to be initiated into being a South Creeker. But I can't tell you all the details about that.
Okay, well.
I can guess.
Well, did it originate kind of with the Hayeses and the, as Grandma would say, the Undamillers?
Yeah, McEwens and Fergusons and
And what little creek was it referring to?
Wheelers and Roos?
I don't know, I don't think.
That was kind of before Rue's
Rue's
time.
They didn't live there long enough.
Maybe you can finish one of the stories that Dad always never would finish, and that's when you walked from your house there to the school over where Bob Dodge lived.
What?
Walk across the field?
Oh yeah, we cut across the field. There's a creek there, and we could fish to school.
If there was something went on, and sometimes that Dad never would tell me about it.
Well,
Maybe.
well, I wasn't in on that.
Whatever it may have been.
I'm glad you weren't. I guess you
Well,
tell that story anyway, probably. Dad wouldn't tell it.
Yeah, it wasn't that bad.
Some
What
stories
they did was
we
they,
didn't hear till we got to be grown
it was a
ups.
hot spring day, early spring day, and there was a dam up in the field there, about a quarter of a mile from the high school. And 3 or 4 of the bigger boys, I wasn't big enough to be notified, or I'd probably been there. But anyway, they went up and went swimming and got carried away and didn't get back. Now, that's the only thing I can think of. Jerry Graff and I, on Halloween night, you see that the teacher used to be a cottage there, you remember that? And they lived right there on the school. So Jerry Graff and I were trying to think of something we could do. That'd be nice, you know, just fun thing. So anyway, we got a part of a roll of binder wire and tied it onto the school bell. And then there's alfalfa field not 50 feet from the building. And I went up there and put the string on and threw the part of a ball twine down, and Jerry took it over and strung it through the willows, and then we laid it down in that alfalfa. Well, then Halloween night, well, we went over in the alfalfa field and started ringing the bell. And the school marm come over, and she went in the schoolhouse and looked, and the rope come down through and was right down head high, just inside the door there. Here the rope was going. Nobody there. And the building was locked, and nobody made entry or anything, and it was real puzzle, and she started calling the directors. She was scared.
That wasn't Miss Mahara, was it?
I think maybe it was Miss Mahara.
She got scared real easy.
Yeah. She was a toughie. But anyway, Jerry and I, we never fessed up to that. We never told her.
Did you ever fess up the goat appearing in the tower of the college
Oh, well, no, we didn't even admit to that. Al Rapp and I, we were out the pine tree and they had a bunch of goats out there. And we thought they needed a goat up to college campus, so.
Oh, did that count?
So they got a goat.
I've been there.
Before we put it up there, we painted a green W on it.
Green, why green?
Well, it's freshmen, we were freshmen.
Was it still alive or?
Oh, yeah, it's healthy. It was yeah, we were carrying it up the stairs, it was a pretty heavy goat, you know, and I was carrying it, and Al was trying to keep its mouth shut, so it was bleeding.
Late 30s.
John, what year was that?
I believe these tapes are going to have to be censored.
I think that was 38 or 39 maybe. In the yearbook, there's a picture of our goat in there. We got a big W on it. It was around the campus for a while. I think that was 39.
Donald, how about the year you had the ice skating party at the top of the school?
Whoa.
Heard that.
It was really cold, and we went upstairs in the schoolhouse. They weren't using it because it was too cold. They couldn't get in. The old Denmark school,
Across from Bob Dot, or
across from where Bob died.
Oh, you mean the old one?
The old one, yeah, that Mother and Aunt Selena graduated from. And so, anyway, we thought, well, geez, here's this water right here. You turn the water on and put a little thin coating of ice there, we'd have a heck of a good time up here in this empty schoolroom. So we did. We run water there, and it was cold enough so it froze quick, and it was nice and smooth. We had a real good time, and everything went fine. We never said what we were doing, and the teacher didn't go up to see what we were doing. But then it started thawing. Bad news. In wintertime, we used to sort spuds with an old hand crank sorter, and Dad had sacks printed J.O. Sorenson and Sons on it. And we didn't wash them or anything, but he peddled them. Peddlers come around and bought them because they were good spuds. They were darn good. And Jackie Kelleher wasn't big enough to jug sacks or anything like that, so he would sit on the pile of potatoes that we'd already sorted and broadcast baseball games or football games or whatever, and give interviews and everything else. He was the entertainment. But you wouldn't believe it, he would have made a heck of an announcer, and he knew the weights and the age and the hometowns of all the players and everything. And he was really entertaining.
Is there any details on how sometimes, I don't know when it was, what time of year or how old you were, or anything, but it seemed like kitty cats would get attacked with a bunch of spud throwers.
Oh, maybe that's what Jack didn't want to tell you. Well, we had an FAA meeting up and listened to Mike Burke. And anyway, and we had Mom and Dad had the car, and so we had the old spud truck. And there was a couple, 2 or 3 sacks of cold potatoes on the back, just sitting there. Well, you know, what are you going to do with cold potatoes just sitting in the back of the truck with a bunch of kids on the back of the truck?
Make good use of them.
Oh, my. We heard about that for a long time. And anyway, these kids, now I didn't throw a spud. Jack was driving. I kept telling
You kids don't do that.
Yeah,
Yeah, anybody that's willing to testify.
right.
In this,
But anyway, we broke out several windows, and there was a migrant camp down there, tent camp.
Railroad lines.
No, not railroad guns. They were people that were working in the harvest. And of course, we wanted to give them a midnight call so they wouldn't went to bed.
Oh, my gosh.
They didn't, but they come out swinging, I'll tell you, we got out of it. And I'll tell you, I don't know how much that cost Dad. There's several windows to replace.
Now, it's interesting you said how much that cost Dad.
Well,
This didn't come out of your hide or your pocket?
we paid for it in the long run. But Dad signed the check. But I'll tell you, that's one thing we never did again.
And how old were you? Like,
Well, I was in high school. We were, it was an FAA meeting up at the high school. And we went up that, and Dad and Mother had the nerve to use the car that night.
So you had to drive.
Yeah, so we had to drive the truck.
And you had Pat Burke as your teacher?
Pardon?
Was it Pat Burke, your teacher? Or
Mike. Yeah, Mike. Yeah, Mike. Yeah, Mike. It was Mike. Well, I tell you, he coached us in basketball. That was an experience.
That'd be an experience just to have him as a teacher.
Well, you know, Art Larson, you know Art Larson. Mike Burke, he would throw erasers at you if you were chewing gum, or if you were really going to punish you, why, he'd get the big wide paddle out. He got over at Washington State. And he'd say, okay, Art, grab your ankles. Art was giving him a hard time. So Art reached down like this, grab his ankles. Then every time Mike would swing, he'd go. And they went clear across the room like that. And finally, he sent Art to the principal.
This is it, you ready to go?
Does anybody remember a story, I can't remember the story, but the punchline had something to do with Stand Back, Madam? It seems like it might have been about Joe Preece.
Oh, that was his little boy, yeah.
Yeah. Does anybody know that
When he
story?
was home and, well, Grandma used to tell that all the time. It was something about.
You know, that's familiar, but I can't remember how it goes.
Can you remember it, Mom?
I think I remember Bob telling me.
Was that when he stole the brown sugar?
Yeah.
And so then he'd run down to his grandpa's house.
That's it.
And Grandpa had a cane, and his mother would be chasing him and then get to the gate. And of course, Joe would slip through, and then the grandpa would swing the cane so she couldn't get through and so stand back,
That was
madam.
it,
Yeah.
that's it, Karen.
I've forgotten that one. I got it.
Stand back, madam.
Now, who was he protecting?
Graham telling that story.
Joe little Joe was being protected by his grandfather.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
From his mother, who was mad because he ate the sugar.
the grandpa's daughter-in-law.
Yes, yes.
I remember.
And then there was another one about eating the chewing tobacco, that his dad made coffins, didn't he, sometimes? He might have made carriages, but he also made coffins? Do you remember that?
Now, when Grandpa Sorenson took his family back to Denmark, Uncle Al saw these Danish guys, and they were chewing plug tobacco. They didn't have the fancy stuff in the bag. It looked like licorice. It was real dark. And Uncle Al thought it was licorice. So anyway, his uncle or whoever it was over there said, well, you want a bite of this? And, oh, yeah, he wanted something. Boy. That lasted real quick.
Now, Karen, did you get your question answered about the ditch?
Yeah, that son brought it up, the
Okay.
ditch with the little flag, and I'd forgotten about the water wheel. But yeah, I knew about that one.
You know, we never did finish South Creek.
Well, is this a loose-knit organization, all the Fergusons and the McEwens and
James didn't like you, you were a South Cricker.
yeah, it was the Danes and the South Creek.
Then we were South Creekers then. I mean,
Well, no, I had to be initiated to become a South Creek.
was Woody Hayes
He
in
was
South
becoming
Creekers?
college.
Yes,
Yeah.
Woody was a South
Martin interviewed said, well, he said, I'll induct you into the South Creekers, but you've got to do these things.
There's
I'm gonna
something
talk
that
about that.
John's not telling us, that's obvious. John's not telling us. But, I mean, if you can't.
I figured you'd already done them.
How about Woody Hayes? I mean, you know, straight arrow like Woody Hayes. I mean,
He was a South Cricker by birth.
He was, technically, he was South Creeker, but I don't think he was really a full-fledged member.
how do we ever find out the rules on the South Creek organization?
Well, in private sometimes, okay.
Do I have to bring a jug along to loosen
No.
up?
Well, it just seemed to me, in my mind, I thought that the Danes lived on one side of the creek and South Creekers lived on the other side of the creek.
Well, what creek it was,
That's what
it's kind of hard to decide. It keeps shifting around, through the year. It soon became a term that it was the Danes and the South Creek.
And I got the
And where
impression.
Joe Preece lived, that was Yankee Corner.
Oh,
That's Yankee
He
Corner.
was right in the middle of the Danes.
So he was kind of an in-betweener.
Yankee Corner, that was in between the Danes and the South Creek.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember they used to have, didn't they have a sign or something there? I was reading Aunt Bertha's letter. Had something about Yankee Corner on it.
Well, that's what they called it, yeah.
must have had to, if he came through New York.
And Howard Sorenson asked me last week if Grandpa John was born in this country.
oh,
Yes, he
And I
was.
thought it was a yes, but I
Oh,
also
I
didn't
see.
remember clearly enough.
Yeah, he was.
But and I don't, I hadn't really ever thought about, were there any other Danes here when he came?
I'm not sure who all was here, but there were some here, I think. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
This history over here said that, was it Swan was the first Dane and Grandpa Soren was the second one?
Oh. But he didn't come because Swan was here, it wasn't
Or the
because...
first Sorensen on here? No, I don't think.
no, there weren't.
And, you know,
Connection.
Grandpa Sorensen is the one that changed the SEN, apparently,
Yeah,
as far as I can tell.
I knew
Did
that.
he legally change it or just by practice?
Well, he figured there's so damn many Sorensens in the neighborhood, he'd make it, simplify it, and change it to SON. All it did was make it worse.
Did he go to court and legally change it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I thought so, but then I wasn't.
So he did that after he was here in the valley?
Yeah.
I-
But you see, his dad
Yeah.
is SEN.
Sure, back in Denmark, when the Braves were all.
Said, well, you're...
You see, SON is an insult, that's a Swede.
Makes sense to me.
But I always heard that he got so tired of correcting everybody when he was doing business that he just gave up and just let it drift.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of them did that. It wasn't just Grandpa Sorenson, you see. Amos family.
Well, they were related, so they all.
No, but Gents
Well, but not through
wasn't.
the Sorenson.
Gents wasn't related,
Not
and
through
he's
the
an orange.
Sorenson thing.
No, that's.
But a group of them decided to change it. I don't know how that came about.
What if there was big discussions at Denmark Hall? You know, if that was the kind of thing that got really, that people really chewed on, like you're giving up your heritage and identity, and, I mean, you'd think that would be kind of a significant discussion.
Well, you know, Brother Jack always told Howard, he says, SONs have a lot more fun than SENs.
They got more money.
He said, yeah, the SENs have the money and the SONs
Howard
have the
still
fun.
tells that in my house.
I say the SENs are the smart rich ones, and
Yeah.
they we're the others.
Oh, we're the good-looking ones. Huh?
Well, that too, yeah.
Jerry, what's that Joe Preece question?
Don, one of the things I was wondering about, obviously, water played a big part just in starting these homesteads. Were there some artesian wells up through there? Was like Grandpa Preece's, or do you remember any stock ponds or watering troughs or any incidents around those kind of things?
Well, Grandpa Sorenson, they hand dug wells. You see, on the old Sorenson place, a hand dug well, and there was a hand dug well on the Joe Preece. And they weren't shallow wells. I mean, they weren't surface wells. They were like
30 feet deep.
yeah, something like that, 30 feet, pretty deep. And Uncle Pete used to take baling wire and wrap it around the head of his beer, and he'd drop it down into the wells. And then when he wanted a cold beer, he'd automatic refrigeration.
Necessity is the mother of invention.
There's strong history here of certain activities.
And I got Dad's watch, which came from Uncle Pete. He used to torment, Dad really admired that watch of Uncle Pete. And he used to torment Aunt Bertha like some mean boys will do to their older sisters, you know. And so finally, Uncle Pete says, John, if you promise not to tease Bertha anymore, you can have this watch. And it was a good watch, you know. I've still got it. And so Dad said, okay, he promised. So every time Dad would start working on Aunt Bertha again, why, Uncle Pete would put his hand out like that and Dad would shut up.
Can you talk about your dad a little bit? You know, I never met him, and I hear lovely things about him, but it would be nice to...
He was one of a kind. He had a world of talent, and he could do almost anything. He was a good blacksmith. He was a fairly good mechanic, and he'd do almost anything. And he was very progressive. And I would say he was a very talented man. I think it's too bad he didn't become an engineer or something like that, because he had the talent to do it. And and you know,
Did he get electricity to this area?
well, yeah, he was responsible. Ralph Lynch, according to their Uncle Ralph had nothing to do with anything. The community. He was kind of like a sour grapes type of guy. But Grandpa Sorenson was very progressive. Dad was very progressive. But Grandpa Sorenson was a little more on the wild side than Dad was. He was a plunger. Dad was pretty conservative, but he wasn't afraid to move out. Dad had a very good organized manner, and he made a lot of progress. But you take Grandpa Sorenson, he came into this valley working on the railroad, had nothing. In a couple of years, he sent for his wife, and he started raising the family, and each one of the kids got 160 acres out in the High Line. Of course, at that time, that money was, or that land was cheap. I think it was $2 an acre or something like that.
Now, did Grandma Sina, were they married in Denmark before he came out here, or did
No.
he?
No,
they'd
he
been-
came out here and got established,
Yeah.
and then he sent for it.
Ah,
Did he send for her, or did he go back and get her?
I think he sent for her, but I wouldn't argue on that. I don't know for sure. But I haven't seen anything that said he went back. I tell you, he ended up with lots of land and lots of sheep, and each one of his kids got 160 acres out in the High Line. Uncle Pete got 160.
I looked at a 1935 DNR map showing the ownership in the whole county. And as near as I could figure, I think it was Grandpa Soren had like 30,000 acres anyway.
Oh yeah, he owned a lot of the Umtanum. He was a plunger. I'll tell you, he was a good modern American guy.
Well, the way Jack talked, he accumulated a lot and went bankrupt several times and came back and accumulated.
Yeah, he never
again.
quit, you know. He,
Boom and bust.
and it was this unfortunate
Like Bob
that he
Lewis
died at a low
Wasn't he at
point,
that same way? Pretty much.
on the low end of it. But he had still accomplished an awful lot. Each one of his kids got 160 acres. And
What was the point of them going up onto the Umptana? Was that just where the cheap ground was at that time, or just an expansion, area of expansion, or?
I don't know what set him off up there. I think he got interested in dry land wheat and part of his
didn't he run sheep?
sheep operation. How he got into the sheep, I haven't found out.
I heard from Ward at least one story about Grandpa Sorenson taking him up there onto the Altanum to work, and it was rodeo weekend. And Ward didn't want to be left up there, so he hitchhiked back to town, and he said, Grandpa Soren came by and told my folks that I wasn't going to turn out to be worth a damn because I didn't stay up there.
Well, I'll tell you, Bob, Jack, and I went up with Grandpa Soren. He had the sheep up there. Had a bunch of sheep, a herd of sheep. And he left. I went with Grandpa Soren to check the herder out, and Bob and Jack were supposed to clean up the camp, wash the dishes, and get everything ship shape and in shape. And we got back from inspecting the sheep, and he talked to the herder and everything. We got back, and Bob and Jack were arguing about who's going to wash dishes, you know. Which is a normal argument. Well, let me tell you, the stuff hit the fan. I said, Jack and Bob sat in the front seat, and he put me in the back seat, and he chewed them out all the way home. And I'll tell you, he was a wonderful chewer.
Especially when it was happening to somebody else.
Jack remembered that story.
But we'd go up and move the sheep, and he'd take us along for our bird dogs, you know, for the extra dogs, you know. And we brought sheep down from the Umtanum several times, you know, had a long ways down.
How about camping trips to, where'd you go, Lake of Cheese, the whole family would?
About what?
Camping trips, didn't you? Sometimes in the summer everybody took off, and when you were a kid, including, you know, Aunt Dorothea and Grandpa Sorenson and... Or not?
With Grandpa Sorenson?
Yeah, did you ever go?
I never went on a camping trip with Grandpa Sorenson. I think I was a little too young at that time for him. I went on camping trips with Uncle Al and Aunt Beth,
Mm-hmm.
and Doc Mundy and Ida, and they were interesting. There wasn't a hell of a lot of fishing done.
No, I forgot to take my fishing pole. Got the cooler pole.
Where did Grandma Flora and Grandpa first, when they first got married, where did they live?
Down in a little house, didn't they?
On your place?
Down, yeah, I think so.
I'm trying to think. I think it was down in the field, yeah. I think it was down in the field.
Then when they thought he was going to go to war, they moved to town for a little while.
Yeah, they moved to town. You know that house along, let's see what street is that, 2nd Street, I think. It's got the gazebo.
Oh, really?
That's where I was born.
Oh, really?
Grandpa Sorenson was over at Fort Lewis, expecting to go overseas, and when the war ended.
You mean your dad?
Have I haven't shown.
Yeah, the paper there, he was inducted into service in 1918 or 17 as a first lieutenant.
Yeah.
He was in the infantry, second lieutenant.
Yeah.
1918. 10th of June.
I don't know where I thought it was.
And everybody
You
was
can
getting
tell
a
I'm
flu.
really organized here.
We're getting a flu
Flu epidemic.
epidemic.
A lot of people died.
Huh.
And it was that in their group that just nursed them
Oh,
through.
huh.
I wonder how long the picture. It seemed like there
Now
was
that's, the picture is too long, so I got, that's just a third of it.
What's this all about? Who's that? Where?
This is the outfit that he belonged to.
Which one's he?
Grandpa
Grandpa
Joe.
John,
you have to
Grandpa
find
John,
it.
oh.
Oh, he's out front
Like, where's
there,
Waldo?
Yeah, really.
Down front.
Early did he?
Oh, how can you know that?
Looks. No, I thought he was second lieutenant. He's out front.
Yeah, he is one of the 3 guys in front.
That's how you
Donald,
started out, wasn't it?
do you know-
Yeah, they picked by size, but it
Do you
didn't take too
know-
long to get rid of the title.
To get that. Okay.
Do you know any stories about when John and Flora first started to notice one another? I mean, they must have grown up together, but when did they start to identify one another as a future mate?
Well, the thing was, in those days, you didn't go far for a mate in a horse and buggy. You look for around. And I really don't know anything about that early period. But I do know that they only lived about a half mile apart. And Denmark Hall was right there. Grandma Flora lived right across the road from Denmark Hall. And so I don't imagine she missed too many dances.
I was thinking about the temperaments of the wives of Grandpa Soren and Grandpa Preece, and how, you know, that old thing about opposites attract, and how both of them had these kind of rascally natures, Grandpa Preece and Grandpa Sorenson, and their wives were kind of stern and all business and serious, and because wasn't Grandma Tina, wasn't she pretty
She was pretty
Pretty
stern.
stern too.
She's a hell of a pinochle player, though, I tell you.
She cheated her grandkids
Well,
when she played with them.
You really had to watch that pencil when she was keeping score.
Get a win one way or the other.
Yeah. When she lived with them, that's one of the things that just made Grandma Flora awful mad, was she cheated her grandkids in cards.
Well, we were on to her. She didn't get away with that.
I know that she was hard, it was hard for Flora when she was living there. And Flora told me that sometimes she would be so aggravated that she would go in her bedroom and sit on the cedar chest and pound the cedar chest and cry.
And I've seen her when she was upset with the situation she'd walk. We had a field road that went right down to Park Creek, and she would just walk down that, just going like a bat out of hell, and walk back, and then she was all right.
If I recall right, Aunt Beth mentioned that Grandma Sina would talk about her in Danish and thought that Aunt Beth didn't understand, and she couldn't speak Danish, but she understood and all that it was not complimentary about her cooking ability, among other things.
Oh.
Grandma Flora was a utility cook. She just cooked, to keep them going. And Jack would say, they would be out in the field working, and it was supper time, and mother's car came roaring down the road into the house as they were coming in from the field with their team. By the time they got into the house, after unharnessing and watering their horses and getting that done, the table was set and the spuds were frying.
Yeah.
They didn't have a microwave either, huh?
No, but she could whip out a meal in a hurry, I'll tell you.
Once was it, you live to eat or eat to live.
Don, one of the things I can remember off the place up at Kittitas is the old hard-wheeled axle sets that they used for house moving. Did he do some house more than just his, or?
Who, Grandpa?
Yeah, Grandpa John O.
Yeah, well, yeah, he had wheels. I don't know where he got them, but that who lived in that house? It was out on Uncle Harold's place, down below you. We moved that out there with those big wheels. Well, Grandpa J.O. was a pretty talented guy. He could do a lot of things. He was a good blacksmith, heck of a good blacksmith.
A good bookkeeper. I know
Yeah.
a professor from Pullman came and looked his books over, and he just hadn't seen a better set of books.
Yeah,
did a double entry.
Unfortunately, I didn't get that talent.
So you're not a good blacksmith?
No, I'm a blacksmith too.
I got to thinking not too long ago about how he put this place together, and when he bought this land down here, about how, and whether he bought it all at once, and
No, he was dickering for it all the time.
when he sold the place up by Kittitas, I suppose he had to have that money to start buying this land down here.
Well, he was finagling, he had things pretty well lined up before. But you see, when I joined the Canadian Air Force, we lived right south of Kittitas. And I didn't know anything what was going on until I got to New York City, and I wired, we had an extra day. We're going on to Queen Elizabeth. Had an extra day, and I didn't have any money, so I wired for money. Well, Howard Sorenson answered the phone from the telegraph office, and he said, I just rolled over and went back to see, well, what the hell is that all about? I'm not interested in that. Then he said, I got woke up in the morning, I got to thinking, hey, I bet that's Don who wants her money. So he called Dad, and then Dad started checking on it. And we had an extra day in New York City, and I was broke, and I wanted to look around a little. And so, anyway, what did I say? I think it was a big deal. I think it's $50 or something like that. And anyway, I kept going back to that telegraph office, and finally the $50 was there. And yeah, it was time to get on board the ship.
Saved you money.
24 hours was
I bet you owed somebody something by that time.
No, there were no credit games there. The cash on the barrelhead there. We got on the Queen Mary, and there was poker games every place, and blackjack and crap tables in the recreation room. And you see, the Queen Elizabeth normally is 1,000 feet long, you know, it's a recreation vehicle. And it was stripped bare. There wasn't anything in there.
There was
4 or 5, 6 bunks were in the swimming pool, you know. But I'll have you know, I went over on a 2-man stateroom. Well, it's 16 of us in there. I'll tell you, and the ceilings were fairly low, you know, they were, I doubt, 7 feet high. So when you went into the bunks, they were, so you had to really get the right angle to get in there. And then about the time you get settled, well, they decide they wanted to have a boat life, or lifeboat drill.
So they converted that to a troop ship to get you guys over there?
They stripped her bare, and then they put people every place. The swimming pool were full of bunks and everything. They had a big rec room, and they fed you twice a day.
How long did it take?
Well, we went way south, so it took us about 5 days. See, we didn't went over without escort. But
Hit the subs.
yeah, the Queen Elizabeth that I went on could outrun any submarine or any warship afloat. They could outrun it.
There were landmines.
But and you got out of the landmines.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, it was winter time, and all of a sudden, like, it was tropical. So we went way south out of the subline.
Yeah, because the Germans were getting about.
And you see, normally they'd go across.
Three-quarters of the ships that went across.
That boat would go across in 3 days, see. If it took us 6, we went way south. But you could see that it had been a great ship to take a pleasure cruise on.
So when you came home, you didn't get to go home. You went to a new place. When you came home from the war,
Yeah.
or came home next time on leave.
When I came home on leave one time, they'd already moved.
Yeah.
No, let's see. No, it was after the war. And they were living across from Amos
Yeah.
in the Baird place.
What did you call it? The
Baird.
Baird. Oh, okay.
Ruby Baird.
Oh.
Yeah.
The murder place.
Be careful, you talk about my aunt.
Is that right, Keith? I'll be
Well,
back.
she ended up marrying Keith's uncle,
Are you gonna tell
the
the story
second.
about the murder?
He wasn't the one,
Tell me the murder story.
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't remember
but he did
that.
leave the country for a few years.
So then sometime after, what year was it when he started putting the farm together down here? 40,
Well,
it would have been 41,
I think it was probably,
40.
Ellen would know more about that. I know that, yeah, I think it was probably 41.
41.
I was writing,
Because when I wired for money, I got Howard Sorenson answered the phone, he said, "Oh, I don't know what that's about," and he went to sleep. Then when he woke up, he decided, "Hell, that's done." And he called Dad, and by that time, the time was up, and I couldn't spend the money.
The Caterpillar was out, starting all the work that had to be done to bring the place into being a farm.
Yeah,
Because the land hadn't really been farmed.
Yeah.
Mostly pasture. And you were a little bundle in my tummy.
Wasn't the house built about 1940? Wasn't the house built?
yeah.
In 41.
41.
But we were living in that, the folks, for
And your
almost a
house
year.
was built about this.
After he
Same
sold the
time.
land up there, and then we were without our little honeymoon cottage.
Your honeymoon cottage doesn't look like a honeymoon cottage anymore.
Do you know, if you would see the inside of that, you would be surprised.
Really?
It has been kept in ship shape. It's
Really?
Really, and I was envious of that nice enamel bathtub and wash basin, just looking so way nicer than that plastic junk I've got in my house now.
Is that the one that you and Peggy and Bob went to keep in?
Yeah.
Where's all that? What are you calling your honeymoon cottage?
Gobbler's Knob.
Oh.
Gobbler's Knob, yeah.
For Bill Lowland?
Yeah,
And this was just, what, a year ago?
yeah, that's
That you went and
converted not too long ago. That we
Well, but the same house? I mean, if we were living in that house when you were married,
No, there was a
No, this is
little
the one down
cabin.
below it.
There was a
Oh, I got it.
cabin there.
Okay.
Still there.
On the ditch, yeah.
oh, I didn't know
Yeah,
that was
it's
still
still
there.
there. I'm trying to remember where that was
Looks like a
moved
bunkhouse.
from, but I can't.
Yeah.
I have no idea, but anyway, when Peggy and Bob and Peggy wanted to, she remembered that cabin, she just was wanting to see it again, so we drove up there. And we were walking around the building and there was a padlock on the door, and we thought it was padlocked, so we just looked in the window. Well, is it Keith that lives there?
Bill.
Bill.
He saw us down there, and so he came, Keith was there. He came down to see what was going on, of course, and then he recognized me. And so I told him, what we were doing. He said, well, the door's unlocked. You can go on in and look at it if you want to. And he told us then that his daughter wanted to, so they had cut off the water system, so it didn't have water. They would have to put a new water system in and hook up the electricity again. And I don't know whether she
Well,
did
you-
actually.
You know that water was all piped down from the spring up in
Yes, yes.
up in the sagebrush?
And he was aware of that too.
Is that
Yeah.
the spring you know about?
I've seen maps with, referred to Sorenson Spring.
And when we were putting it in, the spring in around the hillside, it's steep like that, pretty good grade, 45 degrees, I imagine. And we went in there by hand and surveyed it out, Dad surveyed it, and then we dug it, kept getting a little wider and a little wider and a little more bank. Then Bob went in there with the little D2 cap, and he climbed the bank a little bit too much, and it tipped over on the track, but fortunately it didn't keep going.
Oh, boy.
Now, I remember some story about a still up by the spring, and was it Bob and Carl Anderson did a little private practice?
Yeah. That was Grandpa Sorenson's production line up there. That was the Ellensburg Poker Club was the source of supply, and his grandson shot the hell out of
Somebody might have just got it over that.
Don, something that you told us a month or so ago that I had never heard anything about was
after the war was over, and you came back, and that you had spent a lot of time in the hospital in Tacoma, and
Yeah.
all of that.
Fort
Do you
Lewis.
guys know all about that?
Well, that's when Sandra and I learned to smoke his cigarettes he left behind on leave. Grandma decided if we wanted to learn to smoke, she'd help us.
So where did the ones we smoke come from?
Must have been the next time he was home on leave and left them.
So how did you end up in the hospital? What was that about?
Well, that was about, well, after the European War was over, I came down with a severe case of, they called it rheumatoid arthritis, I don't know what it was. But anyway, my joints were swelling up and everything, and they put me in the hospital over there. But that was after the European War was over. And at that time, everything was in flux, and there wasn't any doctors, nothing. And I was in a tent hospital at Liège for a long time. And then finally they shut me down, and they got enough airplane rides why they shut me down to, and I couldn't get away. I kept trying to get sent back to the outfit but they wouldn't do it. And so then I flew back to Texas to an arthritis special clinic, and I spent a couple, maybe 3 months or so down there, and they tried several treatments. And well, I'll tell you, I met a real doctor down there. He said, he come and checked me out and looked at my chart, and he says, "What the hell are you doing laying in bed?" I said, "They told me to be immobile." "You can't be immobile. You can't be immobile." "What are they?" He said, and he started writing. I said, "What are you writing?" He said, "I'm going to put you down for some treatment." But he said, "The first thing I'm writing you is 48-hour pass." I said, 48-hour pass? I can hardly walk. "Well," he said, "you can walk a ways and then sit a while and then walk again." And I said, "Can I drink whiskey?" "Sure."
You're on.
The magic words.
That was the beginning of the recovery, right? He gave me a 48-hour pass. They gave me treatment, sir. They gave me, I didn't like them much. They gave me these, I don't know what they call them or if they even use it anymore. They give me something that introduced a high fever, kind of a sweat treatment. That wasn't any fun, but they didn't last very long, and then he would send me out on another 48-hour pass. And he said they did absolutely the wrong thing to you. All they did was make it worse. And so after that, I got pretty mobile.
But then they kept you in the hospital here in Tacoma for, how long did you say? I mean, it was like...
Well, let's see. It must have been 8 months, something like that.
They didn't have group health then, did they?
No, and they gave me, they didn't even give me, you couldn't really, they gave me some physical therapy type of stuff, but they didn't give me any medical treatment after I left Texas. Why, they had decided that it would run its course, you know. So every Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday, the doc would come through and he'd say, "Okay, you're not scheduled for anything. As soon as I make my rounds, you're out of here. Come back Monday." So I'd head for Ellensburg. And I was driving Dad's old pickup. I even took it down, had it painted, and had the fenders braced up, and those things were necessary. And I'd stop at the Elks Club in Seattle, in South Seattle, there on about 4th Street, and there's the Elks Club down there, and all the old Ellensburg guys. Everybody from Ellensburg always went into that Elks Club.
And that's where you ran into that Odegaard guy?
And that's where I ran into Odegaard. As soon as he found out who I was, he was looking for me every Wednesday, and he'd glom on to me. And he'd start telling me Joe Preece stories. And he said he came in to Kittitas, and didn't know anybody, didn't have any questions, and I guess he had a passel of kids, and he's going around, and did I tell you the story about the first time he bought hay from Joe?
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, he said he went, and after that, he says he was a friend of Joe Preece's, and Joe Preece always gave him a hard time. And then he let him off the hook in the end.
Do I recall correctly that when you were flying bombers in Europe,
Pardon?
when you were in Europe flying the bombers, and you were one time in formation and things got out of line and the bombs from the plane above came down through the nose of your plane?
Yeah. Yeah, they were cluster bombs, and they had to fall through the air so far before they armed. And then all the hardware that held them together, there'd be a big rack of bombs, and maybe they'd be personnel bombs, and maybe 20, 30 pounds apiece, you know. And they'd be all locked together, and they'd hang in the bomb bay, and then when you dropped them, they had a little propeller on them that would unwind and turn them loose, see. And there were lots of airplanes out that day, and all going for the same target, the same area, and all of a sudden, why the co-pilot said, "Don, look!" And geez, the sky was just coming down with bombs and iron and they went through the nose, but they either weren't armed or they didn't go off, or else it was the stuff holding them together, you know. But it knocked everything out, and of course the planes hadn't been cleaned out properly, and maps were flying, and the dirt, and I didn't have the goggles in place.
I remember something also about, didn't you one time borrow a general's aircraft for some personal mission?
What was that?
Didn't you at one point borrow some general's aircraft for a personal mission of some kind?
Oh, yes, I did. I went to see Jack Kelly. But unfortunately, I missed him. I missed him by, I don't know, half a day, or whether he'd shipped out the day before. He'd been wounded, see. And then the email I got, by the time I got the letter, it was probably a couple weeks.
Now, the general said go ahead, or did you just happen to,
Well,
the plane just happened to be available?
it just happened to be available.
That's kind of what I remember.
Yeah.
How long ago Jack Keller died after that? Got killed?
Well, he died very shortly after he got back to the front. He was in the front, and I knew he was, but our mail was so damn slow. By the time I heard that he's wounded, I found out. I went in to General Anderson's office, and he got one of his aides to look it up and see where he was at. I found out where he was at. And then that airplane happened to be going there, and I got in it.
Or you got in it and then it happened to be on there?
Yeah. How did Jack get injured? What was it?
He was an infantryman, and he was wounded, and it wasn't a real serious wound at that time, and they kept him there and healed him up and then sent him back in.
Where was he at when you were going to go see him?
Well, see, that was before the invasion, or during the invasion. And he was at a hospital over in I can't remember the names, but anyway, he was in a military hospital. And I went in there, and they apologized. They said that he just shipped out. He just shipped out, and I missed him.
But now he went back to the front, and then what happened?
Then he got killed, and I don't know the details of that. But he was promoted. But I figure that if I'd have caught up with him, we'd have went AWOL, both been in jugs.
So he might have still been alive.
But what country, I mean, what country was that battle taking place in?
Well, it was in France, where he was killed.
Yeah.
But the
It was
hospital was in
right
England.
after the invasion. But where he, the hospital he was in was in western England. And I got in my little light plane and flew over there and got his outfit, and he had shipped out the day before.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful.
Hey, Ken,
And thank you.
vote Democrat.
My pleasure.
Eddie Murray all the way.
All right, glad to hear that you're coming around.
Patty Murray. Gee.
We need a
Thanks a lot.
People on the English bases, and did you see some things in there?
I saw some things that they're pretty well tore up, the ones that I was familiar with.
Yeah.
There was one downtown area, I can't remember the name of it, but I'd been in
That pub that was down, they showed
Yeah.
the English street and the pub.
yeah, I'd been in that.
They had a pretty good plane.
Are you
They
questioning some of the
had a small plane, I think.